Louis Slotin, The Demon Corps, 1946. May 1946. World War II is over, but at Los Alamos the work never really stopped. Scientists are still handling the same plutonium cores that were built for the bombs, running tests to understand exactly how close you could push nuclear material toward a chain reaction without actually setting one off. The test even had a nickname, Tickling the Dragon's Tail. The idea was simple and honestly terrifying. Physicists would manually bring two half-spheres of beryllium together around a plutonium core, using them to reflect neutrons back into the core. Get it close enough, and the core edges toward criticality. Pull back just in time, and you're fine. Get it wrong, you've built, for a fraction of a second, an uncontrolled nuclear reaction in your bare hand. Louis Slotin was the guy doing it. And here's the part that should make you a little nervous. He wasn't using the approved safety shims to keep the two halves apart. He was using a screwdriver. Just a regular flathead screwdriver, balanced by hand, with 7 other people in the room watching. On May 21st, the screwdriver slipped. The two halves closed completely. The room lit up with a blue flash. That's ionizing radiation exciting the air itself, and everyone felt a wave of heat roll through the room. Slotin's reaction was almost instant. He physically yanked the two hemispheres apart with his bare hands, stopping the reaction and, honestly, saving the lives of everyone else in that room. But in doing that, he absorbed a radiation dose so massive it's still used as a case study today. Over the next 9 days, doctors watched his body essentially fall apart from the inside, his organs failing one by one in an order that let them predict, almost to the day, when he would die. He died on May 30th, 1946. He was 35. And here's the detail that turns this into something even bigger. This wasn't even the first time this exact plutonium core had killed someone. That core already had blood on it, so to speak, from 9 months earlier. Which brings us to the story that doesn't get told nearly as often. Harry Daghlian Jr., the first Demon Core victim, 1945. Let's rewind to August 1945, just days after the atomic bombs were dropped on Japan. At Los Alamos, a young physicist named Harry Daghlian is working late at night, alone, at a facility called Omega Site. Now, working alone with fissile material was already against protocol, but Daghlian was doing it anyway, stacking tungsten carbide bricks around that same plutonium core, one by one, testing how the bricks reflected neutrons back inward. He was mid-stack when his hand slipped, and a brick fell directly into the middle of the assembly. Instantly, the setup went critical. Daghlian moved fast, tearing the stack apart with his hands to stop the reaction. But the damage was already done. He absorbed a lethal dose of radiation in that split second. He died 25 days later, on September 15th, 1945. So here's the unsettling math. The exact same piece of plutonium killed 2 separate physicists in under a year. After Slotin's death, hands-on criticality testing like this was banned entirely. From then on, it would be done by remote control, machines standing in for human hands. Too late for 2 young scientists, but it changed nuclear safety protocol forever. And that plutonium core, it got a name that stuck in history books. The Demon Core. Marie Curie, destroyed by her own discovery, 1898 to 1934. Now let's go back further. Decades before the bomb was ever built, before anyone even really understood what radiation was. In 1898, a Polish-French physicist named Marie Curie, working alongside her husband Pierre, discovered 2 new radioactive elements, polonium and radium. This wasn't a minor finding. It cracked open an entirely new branch of physics and chemistry. She'd go on to win not 1, but 2 Nobel Prizes in 2 different scientific fields, physics and chemistry, something almost nobody has ever done. Here's the thing though. At the time, nobody understood that radioactivity was dangerous. In fact, quite the opposite. It was marketed as basically magical. Radium got added to toothpaste, cosmetics, even novelty drinks, all promising healing and vitality. And Curie herself treated it with a similar kind of casual comfort. She carried vials of radium in her pockets. She kept a sample on her nightstand at night, just to watch it glow in the dark. During World War I, she went even further, developing mobile X-ray unit, nicknamed Petites Curies or Little Curie. and personally operated them near the front lines to help treat wounded soldiers, again with essentially no protective shielding. Decades of this kind of unprotected exposure caught up with her. In 1934, Marie Curie died of aplastic anemia, a bone marrow disease almost certainly caused by her lifetime of radiation exposure. And here's a detail that still gives people chills. Her lab notebooks and even her cookbook are still radioactive today. They're kept in lead-lined boxes at the National Library of France, and if you want to view them, you have to sign a waiver and wear protective gear. Nearly a century later, her own notes are still too hot to touch. The Radium Girls, poisoned by a miracle discovery, 1910s to 1930s. Curie's discovery didn't just change science, it created an entire industry, and that industry had a human cost that's honestly one of the darkest labor stories in American history. In factories across the U.S., places like the United States Radium Corporation in New Jersey, companies started using radium-laced paint to make watch dials and instrument panels glow in the dark. And who was doing the painting? Mostly young women, teenagers even, hired specifically for their fine, precise brushwork. They were taught a technique to keep their paintbrush tips sharp. Lip, dip, paint. Put the brush to your lips to form a point. Dip it in the radium paint, paint the dial. Lip, dip, over and over, hundreds of times a shift. The company knew this paint was dangerous. Their own chemists and the men handling radium in the lab wore lead aprons and used tongs. But the women painting the dials, they were told the radium was harmless. Some were even encouraged to dab a little on their nails and teeth for fun, so they'd glow at parties. Within a few years, workers started getting sick, horrifically sick. Their jaws literally started disintegrating, a condition that came to be known as radium jaw. Teeth fell out, bones fractured with no warning. Some developed bone cancer, and when they went to the company for answers, they were told it was something else entirely. Syphilis was one of the excuses actually used, specifically to discredit these women and avoid liability. A small group of them refused to stay quiet. Their lawsuit against U.S. Radium became a landmark case in occupational health law, eventually helping establish the right of workers to sue employers for damages caused by unsafe conditions. Here's the truly disturbing part, though. When some of these women's remains were exhumed decades later for research, their bodies were still radioactive, enough to register on a Geiger counter generations after their deaths. Clarence Daly, killed by the X-ray, 1904. Sticking with radiation for one more story, this one involves a name you'll definitely recognize. Thomas Edison. In the late 1890s, Edison was fascinated by X-rays, this brand new technology that let you basically see through skin. His lab assistant, Clarence Daly, became his main test subject, spending years testing X-ray tubes and fluoroscope, often putting his own hands directly in the beam to check how the equipment performed. Nobody at the time knew this was dangerous. There was no concept yet of a safe dose. Over time, Daly developed dermatitis on his hands and face that just wouldn't heal. It got worse. Doctors ended up amputating fingers, then his hands, trying to stop the spread of what we now know was radiation-induced cancer. It didn't work. Daly died in 1904, and here's the thing that really drives it home. Edison, who had personally pushed this research forward, was reportedly so shaken by watching his own assistant die from it that he shut down his X-ray experiments entirely, and, according to reports, said he'd become afraid of the technology himself. Elizabeth Fleischmann, the X-ray pioneer, 1905. Around that exact same period, on the other side of the country, a woman named Elizabeth Fleischmann was doing groundbreaking work of her own with X-ray technology in San Francisco. She built and operated her own X-ray apparatus at a time when very few women were doing hands-on scientific or medical work at all, using it extensively to help diagnose patients, including during the Spanish-American War, treating soldiers with embedded bullets and shrapnel that X-rays could locate without surgery. Like Daly, she had no idea what repeated exposure was doing to her body. Years of direct, unshielded X-ray work led to cancer, and she died in 1905, still in her 30s. She's largely faded from mainstream history, but in her time she was one of the true pioneers who helped turn X-ray imaging from a novelty into an actual medical tool at the cost of her own life. Jesse Lazier, the doctor who let mosquitoes bite him, 1900. Let's step away from radiation for a bit, because radiation was hardly the only thing scientists were lining up to get killed by. In 1900, Yellow fever was a massive, terrifying mystery. Nobody could agree on how it spread. A Cuban doctor named Carlos Finley had a theory. Mosquitoes were the carriers, but the medical establishment mostly laughed it off. Enter Jesse Lazier, a physician on the U.S. Army's Yellow Fever Commission in Cuba, led by Walter Reed. Lazier wanted to actually test Finley's mosquito theory, and here's where it gets deliciously murky. Official records claimed Lazier was accidentally bitten by an infected mosquito during routine research, but his personal notes, uncovered later, strongly suggest he let it happen on purpose. Full, deliberate self-experiment. So why the cover story? Turns out, some historians believe it was so his family could still collect on his life insurance. Policies back then often refused to pay out for death caused by voluntary, high-risk experiments, which means this man may have engineered his own death and then lied about it posthumously for his family's insurance claim. That's next-level dedication to a bit. Either way, Lazier developed yellow fever and died within days. But his death confirmed exactly what the commission needed. Mosquitoes really were the carrier. That single discovery didn't just save countless lives afterward. It directly enabled the construction of the Panama Canal, which had previously stalled because yellow fever was wiping out workers by the thousand. Daniel Alcides Carrion, infecting himself to solve a mystery, 1885. 15 years before Lazier, a strikingly similar kind of sacrifice happened in Peru. In the 1880s, doctors suspected, but couldn't prove, that two diseases were actually the same illness. One was Oroya fever, a brutal disease with a death rate that was, frankly, terrifying, tearing through railway workers. The other was Verruga peruana, or Peruvian wart, a much milder skin condition. A young medical student named Daniel Alcides Carrion decided to settle this the hard way. In 1885, he had blood drawn straight from a wart lesion on a patient and injected it into his own arm. As one does, then he did something remarkable. He documented every single symptom as it appeared, tracking his own pulse, his own fever, essentially running a live scientific study on his own dying body in real time. Taking notes on himself, dying. He was right. Same disease. But Oroya fever, the deadly version, is exactly what he developed, and it killed him within weeks. His research mattered so much the disease was later renamed Carrion's disease in his honor. In Peru today, he's remembered as a national hero of medicine, with his own official day of recognition, a rare case where a scientist's death actually immediately advanced medical knowledge, instead of just standing as a warning label for everyone else.